Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar series, Defining and Executing Successful Global Payroll Strategy. We have a very international audience this afternoon. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for joining and making time to speak with us. My name is Trevor Townsend. I'm one of the founders of Pay Czar, and we're innovating in the global payroll space. Anyone interested in learning a little more about Pay Czar can visit www.payczar.com. So I'll be your host for today's webinar, and I think we have some interesting points to share with you around building your business case, and look forward to spending the next hour or so sharing those, and looking forward to a very interactive session with everyone here today. But before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. Your lines have been muted for the presentation. In order to ask a question, feel free to use the chat function, and we'll respond to those questions in the chat, or we will take them as part of our Q&A at the end of the session. The webinar will be recorded, and we will make it available to you over the next few days. So without any further ado, I'd like to pass you over to my co-founder, Mark Oliver Fiedler, who will take it from here. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Trevor, for the introduction. And also from my side, a warm welcome to everyone that we have on the line here today. Thanks for joining us. So I thought before we launch into the webinar, maybe it would be appropriate to just give you a few quick words about myself and also about Pay Czar. For those of you who've not crossed paths with us and don't know that much about us. So a little bit about myself. As Trevor mentioned, I'm co-founder and CEO of Pay Czar. I have been building IT services and enterprise cloud solutions for some of the world's leading technology companies over the past 20 years. Worked at Boston Consulting Group, Hewlett-Packard, Oracle, and then ADP, just before I launched Pay Czar, where I was Chief Strategy Officer and Chief Marketing Officer for ADP's international business. Learned a lot about, in that role, about the challenges of running multi-country payroll operations, and decided when I left ADP about a year and a half ago to launch Pay Czar. What's Pay Czar? Pay Czar is really the first open payroll management platform, and the important emphasis here is on the underlying word open. So what we do is we help multinational companies connect and streamline all their international payroll operations through one central hub. And what's us fundamentally different from some of the other traditional global payroll solutions out in the market is the fact that we let customers keep their existing local payroll solutions, and hence the term open. So we have an open network concept, which means in order to benefit from the integration, from the harmonization, standardization that our platform delivers to you, you do not need to rip and replace out your existing local payrolls, as would be the case with most of the traditional solutions, which ultimately means in terms of benefits for customers, our solution is very flexible, it's very fast to implement, and from a cost perspective, it's significantly more cost effective than some of the traditional modes of deploying global payroll solutions. And as Trevor mentioned, you can find out more about us through our website, or obviously also get in touch with us directly through the email that was sent to you as the invitation to this webinar. But this webinar is not about us, so let's talk a bit more about global payroll and the global payroll journey and the strategy that we see behind that. As we meet with customers and prospects around the world, one of the things that is very clear in those conversations is that there are many companies, large and small, who are looking to optimize their global payroll operations and are rethinking their global payroll strategy. And it's really great to see the initiative and the drive to transform global payroll operations. But it's also clear from the conversations that this can be a quite daunting and challenging undertaking for many organizations. In particular, given the fact that most payroll professionals that we meet are really mired in day-to-day operational challenges, and therefore tend to find little time to really step back and have sort of the peace of mind to think through all the strategic considerations that come with transforming their global payroll function. And of course, as in many large-scale change projects, there are many different options and dimensions to be considered to build out a global, successful global strategy. So the thought behind this webinar series was really to share some insights about global transformation journey, about the global transformation journey. With that, we hope to help inform the efforts of companies that are evaluating how to take forward their own global payroll strategy. And the way we structured the webinar is, as you can see here, in 3 sessions. In each of these sessions, we will focus on different themes, different aspects that we believe are important to think through and talk through. First session here is going to focus on the why go and try to implement a global payroll model in the first place, and what's the business case to justify such a transformation. The second webinar will follow then to build on this conversation today to get further into what different design and deployment options exist to build out your global payroll model. And we'll look in that context at some of the pros and cons of these different design options. And then the third session really gets more into the implementation aspects, how do you roll this out, and what are some of the key success factors that make an implementation successful, but also what are potential pitfalls that you would want to avoid in that process. So that's a little bit the context for today's conversations, fits into a larger conversation. And in today's sessions, we're really going to focus on these 4 main topic areas. I'll try to answer questions around what makes payroll, global payroll, so complex to start with. We'll look a little bit at the trends that we see in the adoption of global payroll solutions. And then we'll start to look into what are the key drivers for a consolidated global payroll operating model, and how can we translate those drivers into a business case. So with that kind of as the framework and plan, here, let's jump right in and start to talk about what we see as kind of the starting point in many organizations. So I think as all of us who are working in and around the payroll industry would recognize, payroll is a rather unique function within a business in a number of different ways. Number one, you need to get it 100% right 100% of the time. Overpaying or underpaying someone clearly is not acceptable. Getting an employee's payslip wrong can really undermine employee morale, employee engagement, and of course not withholding the right amount of taxes or Social Security can also get you into serious trouble with the tax and Social Security authorities. So you got to get it right. In addition, it's a function that's highly regulated by laws and labor agreements that obviously dictate things like taxes, Social Security, minimum wages, sick leave pay, overtime pay, lots of things that are stipulated by external forces, so to speak. Those laws also have the nasty tendency that they tend to change all the time. So most places you have at least yearly updates to laws and regulations, and in a lot of cases, those updates that come out include dozens of changes that need to then be reflected in your payroll systems and payroll processes. And now, if that wasn't enough, each country, and in some cases even within each country, each state has their own unique rules and requirements that you need to comply with, which means when you're operating in an international context, that complexity grows exponentially. So as a result, most multinational companies operate with a very large number of different payroll solutions that are specifically tuned to the specific local requirements. There is no one-size-fits-all solution that can be used across all the different countries that most organizations operate in. And so a recent study has shown that the average number of payroll solutions that multinational companies have in place are over 30 different platforms. So I thought it'd be interesting to just poll the audience here on the phone a little bit, just to keep this a little bit interactive as well, and ask you to share with us, if you know the answer, how many different payroll platforms do you have in use in your organization today? I'm curious to see what kind of range of responses we might be getting. So if you can just click on the chat function, it should be on the lower part of your screen, and type in the number. That would be fantastic. Give it a moment here for people to find the chat and type in their numbers. All right, I see some. No one's breaking the 30 yet, which is I guess, good news for the group overall here. So means you're on the better side of that average. All right. Keep the answers coming in, but so I see kind of a range here, anywhere from, I think, 4 kind of at the lower end to, I think, 20 and more at the upper end. So so it's good to see we have quite a range of organizations in terms of size and current payroll platform complexity. Now, I think if you are operating, if you're one of those companies that's operating with a fairly large number of local payroll platforms today, you probably also recognize that model then comes with complexity and fragmentation in a number of different ways. So number one, you end up having lots of different processes that lack any form of standardization. And in many cases, we find companies have, in fact, no or very limited visibility how their local payrolls are actually being executed. I recall a recent conversation where with a large multinational organization across probably about 50 countries, where they didn't know whether the local payroll is being executed in-house or it's outsourced. So visibility when you have such a heterogeneous environment into how the execution happens locally on the ground tends to be very difficult. So also obviously creates then a challenge in terms of leveraging any kind of synergies across the organization. A lack of synergy then obviously also means, from a cost perspective, you're not necessarily operating in an optimized environment. Secondly, given the large number of payroll systems, you have to deal with lots of interfaces, since payroll sits kind of in the middle between a number of different adjacent functions and systems like core HR systems, time and attendance systems, expense management, accounting systems. So those interfaces in a lot of cases then end up being manual, simply because it's not economic to create lots of different system integrations, which opens up, of course, then the door for potential errors, human errors in the process, as well as, in the worst case, fraud in the process as well. We also typically see a lack of consistent global controls in terms of being able to, again, track and monitor what's really happening on the ground, which, of course, can then create a concern also from a compliance perspective. And for example, in the context of the new data protection laws that have recently been introduced here in Europe, GDPR not having strong governance and oversight how your data is being handled and stored across the organization can translate into a significant liability for your organization as well. And then many organizations that we speak with, they also lack any sort of consistent consolidated global reporting capabilities to look at all the payroll data across the entire organization in a consistent manner and create global or regional views of what's driving changes in their labor cost. Which of course is particularly disconcerting not to have that kind of visibility, since labor costs tend to be, for many organizations, by far the largest cost block. So when you don't have good analytical insights into the makeup of those costs and trends of those costs, that certainly is not a great situation to be in. So with that sort of as some of the underlying challenges and complexities in operating in a global payroll environment, it's not surprising to see that there has been a growing trend for better, more integrated global payroll solutions. So the numbers that you see here on this slide show the market size for multi-country payroll solutions. We're using this kind of as a proxy here to show the level of demand. And as you can see, the demand for these integrated multi-country payroll solution has more than doubled over the last 4 years, based on a study conducted by Everest. And what's interesting is that growth, if you drill into the numbers, it really cuts across pretty much all industry segments, different size segments, large but also increasingly small organizations that are moving to more integrated global payroll models, especially as small businesses tend to expand internationally earlier and earlier. We see an increasing number of smaller businesses that start to look at how to consolidate their global payroll functions and structure them in a more integrated global manner as well. So quick polling question again to keep the conversation lively and see kind of where your current point in the journey is. If you share with us where you are in your current journey towards global payroll models. So we've given it here a multiple choice to keep the answer simple. First answer would be we've already implemented or are in the process of implementing a centralized global regional solution. Answer B, we're planning or contemplating the implementation of a global regional solution. C, we've looked at it but concluded it wasn't for us. Or C, we haven't given it much thought yet. So let's give it a moment. If you can answer again, please, using the chat function and indicating A, B, C, D, or other. If you have another case for yourself, I'll be interested in learning about that as well. Wonderful. I see lots of A's, a couple B's maybe, a D in there as well. Great. So I think we see a range of different stages of the journey where members from the audience here find themselves in. And so hopefully the conversation that we're having today and over the next couple of webinars will be insightful and enlightening for all of you throughout those different parts of the journey. So what we wanted to then talk about next here is a little bit the question, so what are some of the underlying drivers and triggers that motivate companies to adopt integrated global payroll solutions? And in our conversations with customers and prospects around the world, we've identified 6 common themes, I would call them, that we've come across, typical drivers that are really pushing this drive towards more integrated global payroll solutions. Number one is a shared service model. So the rollout, as companies are rolling out either regional or global shared service centers and put their payroll operations, a lot of cases it's HR and payroll operations, together into shared service center structures. These organizations are also looking to enable those shared service operations with common tools and common processes in order to drive additional synergies and efficiencies in those shared service operations. We'll talk more about that specific shared service aspect in a moment. So that's certainly one driver that we see towards the adoption of global payroll model. Second scenario that we see quite a bit, I would say, especially over the last couple of years, is companies that are rolling out global human capital management solutions, whether that's a Workday, an Ultimate, SAP SuccessFactors, Oracle, Sage. In many of those cases, as they're consolidating the HR side of their business, they're also looking for ways to connect that consolidated HR platform up to their local payroll systems. And so one way to facilitate that is then also to look at how to connect up, standardize, and harmonize the payroll side of that equation. And so that's another driver for the adoption and deployment of integrated global payroll platforms that we see. Third scenario, third driver here is process automation. So generally companies looking to automate their payroll operations, which typically tend to be quite manual and at the local level, especially in smaller countries where the payroll might be maybe processed through smaller local players that don't have the technology sophistication. A lot of these processes are still done quite manually, and so bringing in a central technology solution that can help to enable these processes and get everyone onto a more digitized, automated technology framework is another reason that we see for global payroll, the adoption of global payroll solutions. Fourth point here is at the bottom, the rapid international expansion that many organizations are going through. So as they're entering new markets, setting up new businesses in new locations, they're looking to have a reliable cookie cutter way to really enable the back office payroll operations for those new countries, and being able to plug into a proven, already built out global payroll network that has local payroll experts sitting behind it that are able to spring into action quickly and in a consistent, reliable manner process those local payroll requirements is being viewed as a big benefit of having a global payroll platform and network to work with. Fifth item on the list here is that falls under the headline of payroll leakage. So what we mean by that is that payroll leakage is really the situation where employees or managers are gaming the system in a way around overtime, sick leave, or discretionary bonuses. A recent study that was published by Deloitte found that on average they estimate about 2.5% of total labor costs is lost to this kind of payroll leakage. And so what organizations are looking to do is apply increased scrutiny around the labor costs and put better controls in place. And the way to do that then is also to have the reporting capabilities, have access to the data and the metrics across the organization in order to identify areas where you might have outliers and non-compliance going on in the organization. So that's another driver for the rollout of payroll leakage. And then finally, compliance overall. Many companies are obviously trying to put better central tools and controls in place to ensure that they can meet the ever-increasing list of compliance requirements. Just thinking here in Europe, but I think also across North America, topics like gender pay, equality reporting, certainly in Europe, GDPR, the EU Working Time Directive, lots of compliance, additional requirements that require strong reporting and governance capabilities. And so having a central framework and mechanism that allows you to have those governance tools in place is another reason why companies are looking for the adoption of these kind of solutions. So, as you can see, the drivers for moving towards consolidated global payroll models can be quite varied. And in many cases, I would say it's not just one or the other, but it's a multitude of different drivers that come together in an organization that start to motivate a company to adopt and push towards a global payroll solution. Really depends on the company's environment and their business objective, which factors ultimately become the main drivers for that kind of transformation. So again, at this point, certainly would be curious to hear views and opinions from the audience as you're looking at these drivers, but maybe others that are important in your specific context. If you can share with us which of the drivers we've mentioned here, or again others in your specific case, are the key drivers that either led you to adopt a global payroll solution if you've already adopted one, or are giving you thought to adopt one at this point. We'd love to get your thoughts and answers on this. Again, please use the chat function in order to submit your response. Fantastic. So see already just from the response here on chat, from the few answers we've been already getting here over the last few moments, quite a variety. And as I would have guessed, a lot of them are multiple answers. Okay, we'll give it another moment. All perfect. I like that. Were there any that we missed? I haven't seen anyone, I think, in the few responses I've been tracking here that come in with something completely different that we didn't mention in here. Always keen to see whether there's some other key drivers out there. All right, well, maybe we'll hit across some others as we go through the rest of the presentation, but I think this certainly shows that there's a whole variety of different scenarios and different motivations that drive that push towards a more integrated global payroll strategy and approach. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at just a couple of these drivers. I thought might be interesting to dive into just a couple of these and talk about them in more detail. So the first one of the most common ones I think we see in our conversations is this shared service transformation. And so we see many companies move towards shared service. Obviously, that's not just unique to payroll, but tends to cut across. It's a general trend that cuts across many different business functions. But typically what we see is that the way these shared service operations start is organizations start by building regional or global centers of excellence. Often they're located in low-cost offshore locations like India, Romania, Philippines. And the main driver tends to be cost savings. But we also then, I think, see that without common tools and common operating platforms, common processes, a lot of organizations really end up getting stuck in what we like to call pseudo shared service environment, which means, you've centralized your team now, you've put them all under one organizational structure, you've offshore and put them maybe into the same location, same office, but they're still running different heterogeneous processes on different tools. And so it still makes it very difficult to fundamentally transform the function and drive additional synergies and real service improvements that would transform the whole experience for both for the end customer and for the overall organization. So what we then see is, in order to get from this middle level of pseudo shared services, which, granted, it's a good step in the right direction, but in order to get to real transformational shared services, where you achieve synergies through streamlined processes and advanced automation, you really need that strong common operating platform. So in order to get to that next level of shared services, that's why we see many companies roll out integrated global payroll solutions that ultimately allow all their payroll administrators, all their employees that are involved in the payroll processes to work with the same tools, with aligned processes, and drive additional synergy effects into their operations. So that's certainly one kind of journey and scenario just around the shared service transformation that we tend to see in many organizations, trying to get to that leap from pseudo shared services to real transformational shared services, and leveraging a integrated global payroll solution as the enabler for that. The other aspect, or the other driver that I thought would be interesting to talk about a little bit here is the rollout of global human capital management solutions, which, based on our conversation, I would say probably in 8 out of 10 cases of customers that we talk to, organizations either have recently rolled out a global human capital management solution, or are in the process, or at least looking at the rollout of a global human capital management solution. So it's a very, very common scenario. And of course, when you roll out a core HR solution, human capital management solution, you're of course always concerned about how that new solution will interface with your existing payrolls that you have in place. So in a lot of cases, that kind of human capital management rollout on the HR side also triggers and changes on the payroll side. So from a payroll perspective, the companies then typically have two scenarios that they're looking at, two options. One is to integrate their global human capital management solution one by one with the local payroll solutions that they have in use, which is kind of the picture on the left-hand side, which tends to be very time-consuming, cumbersome, and costly endeavor, especially since these integrations that need to be built out are not a once and done type of effort, but require constant updating and tuning, right, as things change on either side of that equation, either on the HR side or on the payroll side. And since we just talked about lots of regulatory changes happening in and around payroll all the time, you're constantly in need of updating and maintaining those integrations. So for most companies, they will, when they choose this kind of model, they would only go through that effort for the largest countries where they deem that to be a worthwhile endeavor. The other approach then is on the right-hand side, basically relying on a payroll aggregation platform like Pay Czar or others that are out there in the market to basically handle the connectivity to the local payrolls as part of the platform model. And then from a HR to payroll integration perspective, only having to worry about that one common integration point into the platform, where the platform has already created standard terms and procedures and data formats in terms of connecting the HR side of things into the payroll world, which then obviously having to only worry about that one big pipe into the payroll environment dramatically simplifies the life of and the challenge of managing these integrations and the data exchange between the global HR solution and your local payrolls. So this kind of simplification that an integrated global payroll model and platform can bring is another key aspect that drives the adoption of integrated global payroll solutions. So so now that we've talked a bit about what are some of the benefits and drivers behind rolling out a global payroll solution, the next question, of course, is how to quantify the benefits. How big are the benefits that can be achieved from having a more consolidated, integrated global payroll approach, and how does that ultimately translate into a quantifiable business case? Of course, the answer here is it's not trivial to do that. The exact impact that is to be expected really depends very much on the circumstances of each individual organization. What is their starting point? What's already in place? And ultimately also exactly how's the new solution being rolled out and being implemented. But I think at a general conceptual level, we see, as represented here on the slides, some of the following key benefits. Number one, certainly an improvement in terms of the team productivity through the enablement of shared services, which tends to allow you to spread the work that needs to get done across a number of different shoulders in the organization, and also brings automation and tooling, which then in terms of the benefits of the increased productivity either can be expressed in reduced headcount, or also, especially in cases where the organization is still growing, in the ability to handle additional workload with the same amount of headcount. So number one is increased productivity, and therefore either cost avoidance or net cost reduction. Number two, again, by using automation tools and more sophisticated ways of managing your payroll processes, for example, having automated data validation tools, we see that organizations are able to achieve much fewer errors and issues in their payroll processes, and therefore less rework. Organizations that we talk with, typically we see organizations spending as much as 60% of their time just to gather and validate the data that they're pulling together for the payroll to be processed. And so by having tools that allow you to automate these processes of pulling together the information out of the source systems and validating the quality of the data that's being pushed into the payroll calculation, you can have significant savings in terms of rework and errors, especially if you can catch those issues already upstream before you start to run your payroll cycle. We also see less compliance issues, again, through having better oversight and controls in place, fewer audits, and fewer than associated penalties with those compliance issues and the audits that might pop out. We also see a reduction in that payroll leakage that we alluded to, again, through having reporting and analytic capabilities that give you better insights into trends and outliers, and allow you to detect where there might be some things that don't look quite right in the organization. You're able to pinpoint those issues faster and more precisely, and avoid situations where the company's losing money by having employees or managers game the process and game the system. And then ultimately, probably in a more intangible factor, if you do deliver quality payrolls with less errors, less payroll issues that the employees has to chase down, you're generally able to achieve better employee satisfaction. I think we can all relate to having a situation where your payslip is not looking right, and you now have to figure out what went wrong and have some sometimes difficult and frustrating conversations with your employer. It's not the greatest employee experience. So if we can avoid that, certainly that will help the employee engagement as well. So for each of these factors that we've stated here, we've listed an experience range, I would call this, on the right hand side, what we generally observe in terms of typical impact that can be achieved. But as mentioned, the level of impact for each of these benefits can and does vary from company to company, and really depends on the circumstances. So with that in mind, because it's quite company specific, what we have done here within the Pay Czar team is we have developed we call it a business case assessment tool, which is really designed to help gather some key data points around the current payroll organization and operating model and how that works and what it looks like, and then also reflects that against the future endpoint, the future model that the organization is striving toward, and the anticipated impacts and changes to those metrics and to those data points from the rollout of a global payroll model. And I would say that there's still a lot of it's kind of a mix of art and science that's involved in applying even a tool like the one that we've been building out here. But it does help to quantify that impact through a more structured and rational approach. Now, in terms of today's session, it would certainly exceed the time that we have in this webinar to go through that kind of model and talk through that in detail. But if this is something of interest to you, if you're finding yourself in a situation where you're at that stage of trying to calculate a business case or analyze a business case for your payroll transformation, certainly give us a shout. We're happy to engage in conversation with you and talk with you further about the kind of model that we've developed here. So certainly happy to follow up with anyone who's interested in diving deeper into that. What we did do instead of going into the details of a in-depth assessment and calculation, I just wanted to give kind of an example at a high level, more summary level, to give you some sense of what typically we see when we go through these kind of global payroll transformation. So here's the case of an organization, mid-sized, about 5,000 employees across 15 countries, with about a dozen different payroll administrators involved in the process today. And as this organization moves into a consolidated global payroll model, a number of impacts that have been reflected here. Starting with a reduction by moving from a completely decentralized payroll operations model that this organization started out with into a shared service or operations model that drives a reduction of a couple of headcounts in and of itself. Furthermore, the automation of interfaces between the HR backend and the payroll that reduces the manual data loads and manual data validations, again, has a net headcount impact that can be expressed in cost savings. And then by having better data quality, less errors, less issues, hence fewer penalties, fewer audits, there's a cost impact of about 50,000 euros that was reflected in this specific business case. And ultimately, the biggest factor really is, in this case, comes from the reduction of payroll leakage, which was estimated to be about 2% of the total payroll cost in this case. and a reduction of 15%. That translates to about 750,000, just given the total gross pay labor cost that this organization is operating under, about $250,000. So $250 million. So that becomes a pretty big factor in terms of the overall business case and achievable cost savings. So overall, for this kind of organization, in this case, the estimate business case was about $1 million in cost savings across a number of these different levers that we're looking at here, which is, I think, if you look at an organization of this size with, in this case, revenues of about 400 million and 50 million in profit, $1 million in annual run rate savings is a significant achievement, and certainly is a business case that would bode very well in most organizations. So, this gives you hopefully a sense. I know this is quite high level and there's a lot more detail, to be worked through and talked about behind it, but hopefully it gives you just a general sense for where some of the impact, financial impact from, moving towards a global payroll transformation is coming from. So, I think this is pretty much getting us to the end of today's session. Just in terms of summarizing some of the key takeaways and what we've talked about, I think we started off looking a little bit at what makes payroll so complex and challenging, especially in the international context, and really goes back to the fact that it's extremely regulated environment and very country specific. We always say at the end of the day, payroll is a very local business. You need to have local experts on the ground, and local execution is absolutely crucial. So that drives, I think, as a starting point, the complexity that most organizations are facing, and how they've grown sort of organically into lots of heterogeneous different systems and processes. We do see that growing trend that we looked at, of multinational organizations of all shapes and colors moving more and more towards integrated, consolidated global payroll solutions, with a variety of drivers behind that. And I think just from the answers that we saw in the chat today, it's something that's reflected there as well. Generally, lots of different drivers come together that motivate and drive that move towards a central global payroll solution. And from a business case perspective, the benefits, I think, ultimately can be boiled down to cost savings. Very clearly, that is a very important considerations in most of these transformation projects, both on the payroll operation side, but also in terms of the broader labor cost and payroll leakage that can be addressed through better controls and oversight. Compliance, reduction of penalties, but also there's sort of the more indirect, intangible cost of, reputation damage. If you find your company name in the press due to compliance issues, certainly not a pleasant situation. And finally, agility, I think, is another key benefit. If you're expanding rapidly and you're looking for a way to spin up new back office operations very quickly, having a global payroll network to rely on that can support you, no matter where you where your next country, your next office opens up, is a very compelling way to grow your business. And then, as we looked at the business case, I think bottom line is quantification is very company specific. It does require individual business case assessment, but we did look at some of the general key drivers that make up that business case. And again, if people on the line here have an interest to engage in a deeper conversation, that by all means reach out to us, and we'd be happy to share with you some more in-depth analysis and thoughts around that. So I think with that, well, the last thing that I do want to point out here is this is the conclusion of our first webinar in the series of 3. The second one is taking place in about 3 weeks, August 16th. I know a number of you have already signed up for that webinar. If you haven't, please mark your calendars, and also go back and look either at our website or at the email that we send you. In both of those, you should find a link to register for webinar number 2, in which we will then now get more into the what, so what does a global payroll solution, what can that look like? What are some of the design considerations that are important, for example, in terms of deciding between what should stay in-house, what should be outsourced, building out regional or global structures, the role of technology and how that can enable and drive your global payroll efficiencies. These are all things that we'll start to engage more in our next webinar. All right, well, that brings us to the end of today's webinar, the first part in our series, Defining and Executing a Successful Global Payroll Strategy. We hope you enjoyed our session today and found it informative and insightful. If you do have any questions, please send us an email to info@payzar.com. We will send out the recording of today's webinar within the next couple days, and we look forward to hopefully speaking with you again soon for our second webinar on August 16th. Until then, thank you again very much for joining us today. Take care and bye-bye.